and then sorted into 500 different groups, and then sending them your way. We are sending them your way via those hosts. They will get the plants. They will call you when the plants are there. For most people who are local around here who can drive to me in Williamsburg and get them, that's fine. But we're trying to take care of people all across the state. So it may be several days, it may be several weeks before you get that call from the hosts, because it's going to take us that long, 2 to 3 weeks probably, to get them all distributed across the state. But we'll still be within the window of good planting time, which is kind of mid-April till the end of May. And I really appreciate their help. We have volunteer drivers who will drive them to some of those hosts. I have been buoyed and encouraged and excited by the number of volunteers. This effort this time alone is probably going to take 100 to 150 volunteers just to get the plants to you. So if you meet a driver, when you pick up the plants for your host, give them a big thank you, will you? So that's enough of an intro, I think, unless you wanted me to say anything more, Kate.
No, that's wonderful. And we'll have some time a little later. I'm already seeing a couple questions in the chat to talk a bit more about logistics, and we'll have some time for that a little later in the program. We do have a packed agenda today, folks, and I'm really, really excited about all of those things. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Our first speaker and presenter today is Harry Campbell from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Harry, to tell us a little bit more about the 10 Million Tree Project here in Pennsylvania.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Katie, for the introduction. My name is Harry Campbell. I'm with the Pennsylvania office of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I do have a few slides I could show you, but if, however, I needed to be disabled, if you will. Otherwise, I can just have a conversation here. So
you should be able to share your slides now.
All righty. Now, some of what you'll see is probably like, oh, this is pretty redundant. We all know this sort of thing, but nonetheless, it's a nice context to remind ourselves each other. So, what if I told you that there was a practice that could help mitigate the impacts of climate change, that could reduce the heat islands that are in our suburban and urban areas, that could help restore the ecological functionality of the over 200,000 acres of abandoned mine land in the state of Pennsylvania, reduce polluted stormwater runoff that affects the over 86,000 miles of rivers and streams, enhances the ability of streams to clean themselves, and thus therefore reduce the amount of pollution that is coming from places like our lawns that are over fertilized, and even reduce the volume of the water that is coming off of our built environments, and protecting our sources of drinking water so that we have cleaner, healthier water for us to consume, while simultaneously providing more habitat and cleaner, fresher, cooler waters for critters like our brook trout in the state of Pennsylvania, and even our state amphibian, the eastern hellbender, while simultaneously reducing crime rates and improving the quality of life of our communities. Well, obviously, for the reason why I'm here today, I could tell you it's trees. And in fact, trees can do that and so much more. And that's why in 2018, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation launched the Keystone 10 Million Trees Partnership, an endeavor to plant 10 million trees, as I like to say, alongside streams, streets, and other high priority areas. And by doing that in 3 major ways. One, we want to partner with a diverse group of individuals who strengthen our existing partnerships and create new ones. We want to serve those partnerships by providing capacity, resources, materials to help plant trees in Pennsylvania. And then, of course, inspire people to do even more. And right now we have over 250 partners across the state of Pennsylvania that have helped us plant over 5 million trees. And we're the Keystone 10 Million Trees Partnership, and we're actually shooting to plant that 10 millionth tree by the end of December 31st, or the end of the year in 2025. So we got a long way to go. We're halfway there. We're excited. The momentum's there, but we got to really buckle down if we want to see that 10 millionth tree planted by the end of fall, at least. We don't want to plant it in December of 2025. Where have our trees and shrubs been planted? Well, they've been planted primarily across the state of Pennsylvania, but we're really focusing in on, obviously, the parts of Pennsylvania that have the greatest impact on local water quality as well. So we're focusing alongside rivers and streams in South Central Pennsylvania, whether it be in Lebanon County, Lancaster County, Dauphin, Cumberland, those areas that really are in need of trees. We have a lot of trees in the state of Pennsylvania, but we don't have them in the right places in order to have maximum impact on things like our rivers and streams, or alongside our streets, like in downtown Harrisburg, in the Midtown area, where they can actually provide that mitigation for heat island effect, as well as capturing and reducing stormwater runoff. And those abandoned mine lands that are dotted across many parts of the state of Pennsylvania, including in the north central parts of the state as well. But we're not just planting trees, directly or indirectly, by providing resources to folks like yourself. We're actually doing things on the policy side of the equation. In fact, as part of the Keystone 10 Million Trees Partnership just a few years ago, we were successfully passing legislation to establish what is known as the Keystone Tree Fund. Next time you go to re-register your vehicle or renew your driver's license, and you do it online, there's options to click to donate up to $3 to various programs. You'll notice that one of those is for trees. The Keystone Tree Fund, or technically called the Restricted Tree Account, actually provides directs resources to DCNR's Tree Vitalize and multifunctional forested buffer program. 60% goes to buffers, 40% goes to Tree Vitalize, which plants trees along in our communities, particularly alongside streets throughout the state of Pennsylvania. The Keystone 10 Million Trees Partnership is a partnership in the sense that we do try to strengthen and expand the capacity of others on the ground, just like yourself, by providing free trees, particularly those areas that I identify for those plantings that I identified earlier. We focus exclusively on native trees, and to the maximum degree practically are getting those trees and shrubs from nurseries that are based right here in Pennsylvania. So we're looking to continue to expand and diversify that work, and to continue to have folks, landowners, as well as organizations join us to help get to that 10 millionth tree. Because quite frankly, we can't, if we try to do it alone, we're going to end up being tired, we're going to be muddy, and we're probably not going to be successful. But if we do it together, we'll be tired, we'll be muddy, but we'll probably be successful, and we'll be a lot more happier along the way. And as we like to say, clean water grows on trees. I'm Harry Campbell, and happy to answer any questions about the Keystone 10 Million Trees Partnership or Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Harry. If anyone has a question that they would like to quickly ask Harry, either in the chat or if you'd like to raise your hand, I'm happy to take a question or two now before we move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Harry. I'm always inspired by the work of mobilization, and just recently renewed my own registration and had that option on my own registration to support the Keystone Tree Fund, which was a very fun experience. Jan. I see your hand, Jan. You're muted though. If you can unmute yourself.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Yes, that was wonderful. And I was wondering if there's a way for us to get that list of native trees that you had put up. There were so many, I only got 3 written down.
Yes, of course, we can provide it in like a table format. And certainly if you join and get on that 10milliontrees.org, TEN, you can actually sign up to receive updates and notices of when trees are made available each spring and fall for planting, and you'll receive the list as well. So I'd be happy to share it informally or formally.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Harry, if you send me that list, I can also include it on the follow-up email we send out after today's program.
Will do.
Thank you, Harry.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I am going to move us right along. I am very, very glad to have my friend Monte Garber from the Stroud Water Research Center here today with us to share a little bit about his work and the work of the center. They're doing fantastic work planting trees all across Pennsylvania, and also providing great education and resources to help us learn about the importance of native trees, how they impact on watersheds, and what's probably most important for all of you is how to plant and take good care of your trees as you receive them later this spring. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Monte.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks, Harry, for your great intro, and Greg. Harry is a good friend and a colleague for many years, and we are very fortunate to have him in Pennsylvania, because if there was ever a time that we needed scientists who know how to translate science for the public, it is now. And Harry is so good at that. And so thank you, Harry, for all you do on behalf of the Chesapeake Bay and streams and rivers of Pennsylvania. So I'm going to pick up where Harry left off and talk to you a bit more of the nuts and bolts of trees and why they're so important for streams, but also what they need in order to actually survive to the point where they can start giving us those many benefits that Greg and Harry talked about. So I will first start with just an introduction of who I am working with. The Stroud Water Research Center is a 50-year-old stream and river research organization in Avondale, Pennsylvania. That's in Chester County near Philadelphia in southeastern Pennsylvania. You can see our mission statement there. We are primarily a group of scientists, but we also have an education program and then a restoration program for which I work. Our science, you see how we describe it there in our mission statement, but that's a mouthful. The shorthand for what we do at Stroud is we study how streams and rivers work and how healthy streams work, right? Fully understand what a healthy stream looks like and how it behaves so that we know the kinds of things we need to do to fix unhealthy streams. Humans make a lot of assumptions about how streams and rivers work. Many of those assumptions are wrong because we're putting all of our human expectations on a natural system that doesn't always behave like we want them to. So Stroud tries to understand those things and then share them with the wider public so that we all know how to be better residents of our watersheds. So watersheds, it's a key point that we all need to understand to have a working understanding of the work that lies ahead of us. Because it's easy to focus on the stream itself as the problem that needs the focus, right? But really, what has been degraded over the hundreds of years that Europeans have been in this country is actually the watersheds, which are the land that surround our streams and rivers. Because it's really how the quality of that landscape that's going to define the quality of the rivers and streams flowing through that land. Yes, we need to clean up our point sources like sewage treatment plants and factories to make sure we're not dumping pollution directly into our waterways, but we've taken care of a lot of those discrete problems, and now we're left with the big issue of how to protect our watersheds. We at Stroud and like Chesapeake Bay Foundation, we work with all kinds of entities. We work a lot on agriculture. Many of you are working in our communities, which is so important because we're going to need everybody in this cause. But what I want to leave you with is that in so many cases, a stream is not impaired or degraded because of the condition of its channel. It's degraded because of how the watershed around it is being managed. And that's what we need to focus on. So, as Greg and Harry mentioned, trees just have so many benefits. Here's an older slide that I've updated to reflect a couple new things that we know about trees and the many benefits they provide us. On the one hand, they're an enormously important climate solution, right? Among very many, because they grab carbon dioxide out of the air and lock it into wood for a very long period of time, as long as that tree is growing and is alive. And also, as Greg mentioned, trees are actually really, really important for pollinators. It's not just wildflowers that help bees and butterflies. Many trees, like the linden, like black locust, like tulip poplar, are incredibly important for pollinators, right? So when we plant a tree, no matter where that tree is, it starts providing these benefits to us as it grows. Now, a tree anywhere is great. I'm going to talk about the benefits of trees once we plant a tree right beside a stream. And that's what we generally call a riparian forested buffer. Riparian is just a word we use to describe that near stream area. It's the grassy area that you see in the left-hand side. Once we plant trees in that area that we call the riparian zone or the near stream floodplain, and then take care of those trees so they thrive, this is what it turns into. This is Lidditz Run, a section of Lidditz Run near where I grew up in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. And there are wild trout living in this section now. It's a real success story. So we're focused on getting our waterways healthy. What waterways are we actually talking about? What waterways need help? Okay, so here's the Chesapeake Bay, right? Gets a lot of attention. Here's the Chesapeake Bay with its 64,000 square mile watershed. Again, there are things that humans can do in the Chesapeake Bay itself to improve the conditions of this natural treasure that just happens to have some real significant problems. We can reduce, or we can better manage harvests, for example, of crabs and oysters and rockfish. We can develop the coastline less or more sensitively, right? But really, the Chesapeake Bay and its future rests with the streams and rivers that are flowing into it throughout this huge watershed. And so the one key point I want to leave with you all today, one of them, there are going to be several to follow, but one that I want you to take home with you is that we fix waterways, estuaries like the Chesapeake Bay, coastal areas like the Gulf of Mexico, by first fixing our streams and rivers, because they are indeed the lifeblood of these bigger waterways that a lot of people are more familiar with. That's how we fix the Chesapeake Bay, by fixing our streams and rivers and making them healthy. The same goes for the Delaware Bay for you all over in eastern Pennsylvania, and the Gulf of Mexico, from which streams in the western part of the state flow into. So when we start talking about streams, here's another pretty poorly understood concept that is so important to your work as conservationists in your own communities. Small streams, very small streams, are the heart and soul of most watersheds. And what we mean by that is that, do you see that river there down there at the very bottom of this picture that says fifth order? That's a fifth order stream or river, right? That might be the river in your community that you actually know the name of. It might be the Conestoga, it might be the Shenango, it might be the Wiccanisco. And you know that because it's a big enough waterway that people use in your area. But those rivers that have names that we know are actually supported by this network of tiny streams in its watershed. And that's really cool, because what that means is that most of us have a tiny little creek very, very close to where we live that's feeding some larger system. In fact, small streams, those first and second order streams that you can jump across or maybe even step across, they're that small, they actually make up 85% of all the river miles in the world. Right? The Mississippi, as huge as the Mississippi is, it only represents a tiny fraction of the flowing water in the Great Plains and Midwest states. Most of the Mississippi watershed are these tiny little streams and rivers. And the great thing about these tiny little streams is that we can have an enormous impact and really turn them around very quickly much more rapidly than we can a big estuary like the Chesapeake or the Delaware. So here's, if I was going to suggest you take a photo of one slide to maybe keep in your back pocket with your phone, here it is. Here's the short list of why trees are so important for streams and rivers of any size, right? A lot of people maybe focus on this idea that we plant trees along streams because they're going to keep the bad stuff that might be running off the land from getting into the water, right? And they do that really well. And that's why I've got that third bullet that says roots to filter runoff and stabilize stream banks. But that really is just where the benefits of these streamside trees or riparian forest buffers, that's really just the beginning. They are actually the life support system that used to exist 300 years ago on all our waterways around Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods, right? That's where the name Pennsylvania comes from. Our streams used to all be surrounded by deep, rich forests, and we cut most of those down. When we cut those trees down, we remove this life support system that every stream and river in Pennsylvania needs. Shade for cooler water, filtered light for the kind of algae called diatoms that stream systems rely on. More habitat and better habitat for the stream. Large woody debris, when that tree beside the creek falls in, please don't pull that tree out unless it's threatening infrastructure, because that tree that has just fallen into a stream is the best fish habitat that money can't buy. Trees provide very important dissolved carbon to a stream, which is important stream food that the microbes eat that drives the system, and also the leaves as solid forms of particulate carbon that drop into the stream and become stream food for macroinvertebrates or aquatic insects, right? Again, microbes and aquatic insects, they are the foundation of a healthy food web in a stream. And we don't get trout if we don't have those building block organisms at the bottom of the food shed, and we don't get them without trees. One other thing here, a lot of people are now assuming that we've got to do all this fancy stream restoration before we plant trees. And in some cases, yes, we need to do more aggressive interventions with the stream channel. But in many cases, in most cases, I would say, planting trees in that near stream area and then doing good watershed management in the rest of the watershed is really all the stream restoration that we need to do. Okay, here's a riparian forested buffer. This is what it looks like when we plant it. Many of you have seen these in your community. One of the important concepts here is if it's not at least 35 feet wide, it's not a buffer. We need 35 feet wide is as wide as we sometimes get on a busy dairy farm. But a stream really wants at least 100 feet of trees each side. In Pennsylvania, if it's not 35 feet wide or wider, it's not a buffer. And what I'm going to shift to next is how we get little tiny tree seedlings that you might be planting in tree shelters like that to this stage and bigger, instead of a bunch of empty tree shelters where the trees didn't actually make it to adulthood. What do we plant? Harry put up a huge list, right, of all kinds of native trees and shrubs that can do well in our communities and in our watersheds. I wanted to show you the short list of our workhorse trees and shrubs, and I'll leave this up for just another 30 seconds in case any of you want to grab a photo of this, because we plant a lot of stuff. But if I had just a dozen of trees and a dozen of shrubs that I could choose from for most of our buffers, these would be the trees and shrubs, because they can handle all kinds of vagaries of landscape and still survive to live another day. So here's what we plant in most of our riparian zones. So we've got a lot of great options we can use. And again, only native. We are only planting native trees and shrubs in this area. But the planting is really the easy part. It's what many of you are involved in your community. And what I want to leave with you today is thank you for doing that. Getting the trees in the ground is the first and most important step. But if there is not follow-up care, particularly on places that like maybe corners of parks or on farms that aren't going to get the kind of high maintenance that a churchyard might, you really will be doing yourself a disservice. You don't have a plan in place for taking care of those trees for at least 3 or 4 years as soon as you plant them. So that's what we're going to finish out with. How do you take a site like this? This is a bare stream area near Stroud. How do you turn a site like this into a planted zone like this? And notice we've laid these out in a grid pattern to make mowing as easy as possible into this. This is what it looks like now. These trees are getting to a place where they really don't need the kind of TLC that we give to them in the first 3 years. But there's a lot of work involved in getting trees to this point. You can't just plant trees in these shelters in most sites and then just let Mother Nature take over. Because what Mother Nature does to sites like this, she turns it into weeds and deer food and rodent food. And you want to support all those organisms, but not with your tree seedlings. Okay, so there are dozens of challenges to buffer success, to tree planting success. Here are the ones that keep us up at night as people who study trees and how to grow them. Deer, voles, and mice are your 3 biggest mammalian predators of tree seedlings. And they have different modes of action, but we've got to protect our seedlings from those 3 guys. Shelter and stake problems. You can't just plant the tree, put a shelter and stake on it, and think that that shelter and stake is going to be upright and happy for as long as there are landowner limitations that we've got to be aware of when we plant a site, be it a churchyard or a farm. There's flooding in this area. There's sometimes saturated soils in this area. And yes, even in a drought situation, those soils can go from saturated to dry in one summer. And finally, invasive plants, which are its own big issue that many of you probably are well aware about. I would love to have each and every one of you down to the Stroud Center in Avondale, if you can make it, where we can show you some of the techniques we're using in person. I'm just going to go over some of them here with slides. Okay, so first and foremost, for your tree, clean culture is really important in those first 3 years. And you may not want to use herbicides. You may not want to mow your site. You'd like to see it turn back into a much more natural landscape immediately. But I will say that tall grass and the weeds that come with it provide the platform for many bad things to happen to that young tree seedling you planted, right? First and foremost, tall grass will provide cover for voles, little tiny rodents that populate an area very quickly and love to burrow into your tree shelter and eat your tree. So by practicing clean culture like this, like an orchard or a Christmas tree farm does, will prevent the infestation of rodents in your area that are the #1 barrier to tree survival. The tree shelter that you see here is 5 feet tall. And that's important because deer cannot reach a tree at 5 feet tall. They can reach a tree in a 4-foot shelter. So if you've got deer in your area, you've got to have a 5-foot shelter. But the mowing and herbicide application plus good stake maintenance are the keys to keeping this tree happy and healthy. Now, not everyone wants to apply herbicides. We don't like to apply herbicides. So we're looking at gravel as a mulch that you see there on the left-hand side of your screen that will hopefully provide the rodent barrier that even if we don't keep that immediate area free of weeds and grasses, we've still got a barrier to rodents getting in. So we're very, very hopeful that this could provide a longer-term solution and help get us away from herbicides in these near stream areas. But please, if herbicides are your tool that you're going to use to protect your trees, and you get pushback in your community about this, call me. I will give you a very straightforward explanation about why those herbicides are important and useful in a very limited space in a limited time to get good tree growth. there's all kinds of other problems that can happen. These bird nets, which help keep bluebirds out of your tree shelter until the tree is out of the tube, they're great for protecting bluebirds, but they will destroy a tree by getting the leader of it tangled up, right? And all you have to do is not install your bird net like that, but instead pull that net all the way down. So we have a small circle the size of a quarter instead of that tassel at the top. And then that tree can poke its head out of that shelter, and yet the bird stays out. Here's another problem we're trying to solve. Sometimes we're so successful with our certain trees and they grow so fast that they get top heavy. So we're looking at some options for preventing this kind of a problem. It's one thing if you have 1 or 2 of these type trees to fix, but if you've got 1,000 of them on a site, suddenly you got a major problem. But finally, just keeping track of those shelters, having someone whose main responsibility is to protect those trees for 3 years and make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen, that's first and foremost. You want eyes and ears around your trees to prevent the kind of abandonment that results in empty tree shelters and disappointed landowners and a billboard for failure in your community. You want trees to be bursting out of these shelters as your billboard for success, right? So what I like to tell people is, please plant trees in your community. But before you do so, figure out who's going to take care of those trees and how it's going to get paid for 3 years, at least, before you put those trees in your ground. And if you don't have that plan figured out, maybe hold off that planting for 1 season until you can get that figured out. Then you'll get trees for hundreds of years in that place, instead of a site that looks like this that makes people scratch their heads and say, maybe I don't want to do that. So planting is the easy part, it's the fun part, but make sure that you follow this really exciting day in your community with a 3-year program of tree care to really turn that into a site of success. And if you want details on what can go into that 3-year plan, Katie will put you in touch with us and I'll get you all the details you need. So with that, thank you. Do we really need more trees? Yes, we do. Just ask any dog.
Thank you, Monte. I hope that that was helpful to folks, and I'm sure there are folks who have some questions. So we are going to move into a time for some Q&A now. So I'm going to introduce all of you to Kristen Cooney. Kristen is our conservation fellow here with PA IPL. I'm very, very glad to have her on the team. So she's going to help us move through our Q&A time. So your options are to put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and Kristen will call on you as we go through. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and Craig and Monte.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and see all of you as well. So to kick off our Q&A, I guess we'll start with, can we plant in some type of pot if we need deer to figure out a 3 to 5 year maintenance plan?
Ah, I see. And Greg, you can jump in too. I would say that if it's a very small planting, yes, you could do that. If you're planting, say, more than 30, 40, 50 trees, you're not going to want to have trees in a big pot. Because what is easy to lift as a tree seedling becomes a challenge to transport and to lift and to plant 3 years later in a big 5-gallon pot. So again, maybe the best way to look at this is, yeah, if you're going to be planting this spring and you don't have that maintenance plan quite set up yet, go ahead. You've got your volunteer day planned. You've got the trees ordered. Great. But then Saturday night, after you're finished with that tree planting, sit down and with a pad and paper and figure out who you might be able to call about funding and about help to put that 3-year plan into place. Because once the trees are planted, they're going to be fine for a number of weeks, maybe even a number of months. but you're going to want to follow up with tree care soon thereafter. So you have time, just make sure that you don't just move on to the next planting. I'll just address one other question I saw there. In many cases, you don't need to water. In most cases, you don't need to water unless we go into real drought into those summer months. These trees are rugged. They are built for survival, unlike a lot of stuff you buy in a nursery. And so, sure, be ready to water if things really get bad. But in most cases, particularly stream sites that are already kind of wetter than most sites, you don't need to water.
I would just add that you also want to choose the right spot for each tree, because there are some trees that will do well along a riparian buffer that wouldn't do well in urban situations. And at least the site I use quite often to kind of help me figure that out is the Morton Arboretum site. They do some specialization in native trees and give a fair amount of information about what's the best place for it. So
I do have my own follow-up question from this too. So sometimes if you leave a tree in a pot for too long, they tend to get root bound or the roots start going in circles in the pot. Do you have any sort of advice for that problem? I've heard a lot of different answers, so I'm just curious what either of you have to say.
I start, if I have that, once I pull the plant out of the pot, if it's bound around the sides, I'll just kind of use my fingernails to loosen up that soil there. And if there's a root that's called a J root where it comes down and then starts going back out, I definitely try to get that out, or if even necessary, I'll cut it before putting it in there, because that's the sort of root, in my understanding, will come up and choke a tree. So, Monte?
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So moving on, how many times per year do you treat a tree with herbicide for the first 3 years?
I don't use herbicide in my places, so I'll defer.
Yeah, it depends on whether there is a pre-emergent herbicide also included in that burn down herbicide application. Those are shorthand. If you have a pre-emergent herbicide that's in your mix, what that does is keep new weed seeds and grass seeds from sprouting. And so you can maybe get away with one application per season. In most cases, we're not doing that. We're just using that burn down type herbicide like rodeo. It is important that any herbicide that you use is really formulated for this purpose and is safe to use near streams and wetlands. Many herbicides are not labeled for streams and wetland nearby use. And rodeo is one of those examples. So if we're just using an herbicide that just burns down the weeds in place, then that's twice a year, once in the spring and once in the late summer, early fall.
I would add, for those people who are doing planting in their own yard, that by and large, you don't need to use herbicide, in my opinion anyway, particularly if you just pull the weeds or pull the grass even around a circle around it. Because what the grass does is that it gives voles kind of a safe territory to move around and not get eaten by hawks and owls. Whereas if you clean an area around it, use gravel, use some mulches perhaps, the voles won't go there just because it's not safe for them.
Exactly. That's perfect, Greg. And I really want to qualify my statements around herbicides that we kind of rely on herbicides. We'll see if the gravel truly works out to be as effective as we're finding it is on our early sites and research, and we can get away from herbicides, hallelujah. We don't really want to use them. They're a hassle. And once you stop spraying after, say, 3 years, well, voles can still move in at that point. Whereas gravel, it's there for years and years and years. So our fingers are crossed that this is really going to provide a new strategy that allows us to get away from herbicides. I also want to say, just as Greg said, that if you're planting into a site like a church ground or a park that is actually going to get regularly mowed, sort of like our yards, boy, a lot of these maintenance concerns go away. Not all of them, but many of them do, because that close turf, oh man, the trees are just going to take off. There's no cover for voles. So then the important thing is just making sure that whoever is on that riding mower has as much care and love for your trees as you do.
And that weed
Because-
whacker.
Yes, and a weed whacker.
Those
Exactly.
weed whackers will just cut holes in your tube. You got to be
Yes.
careful about that. Yeah.
Exactly.
And just a distinction too. The riparian buffers are often on grasslands and farmlands, where there's a different situation. If you're planting along an area that's already pretty forested and there's not a lot of grass, then you've got a whole nother issue, probably dealing with non-native invasives like privet and honeysuckle and stuff like that. And that doesn't grow as fast, but it can be just as destructive too. And the vines that grow in there. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for this great discussion so far. Building off a little bit on how to protect and buffer your plants. I didn't hear too much talk about mulch. In a lot of plantings I've been to, they use mulch. So I was wondering if you recommend that. And in addition to that, I know mulch volcanoes are kind of a no-no, where the mulch kind of goes up over the like the I forget the name of it, but the root flare, I believe it is.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if you have any other comments there before we move on.
Since
Greg, do you want to start with that?
Well, I don't plant in grasslands very often so far. I'm mainly kind of planting in a different kind of habitat, not near farmland. So I do rails to trails and parks and stuff like that.
Yeah. We generally don't use wood mulch, mainly because it's the size of our sites. You really have to differentiate. Is this a restoration site where you're going to have 1,000 trees? Or is this a park where you're going to have 100 or 50? Then certain things become possible at that very small planting, like nice wood mulch, which the trees will love, that really wouldn't be an option at 1,000 trees. The other reason we don't really use wood mulch is that it floats away in high water. And that's another good thing about gravel. It stays in place. I think you don't need to worry about the volcano problem that you would otherwise, because the shelter keeps that mulch away from that root collar.
Great. Thank you both so much for all of your feedback. I do see one hand up, so if you want to unmute and ask your question, please feel free. And we're kind of coming up on time here for Q&A, so maybe only one or two more.
Yes, I have a question about wheat cloth. How does that, I mean, we planted already like some 120 trees or so, tree seedlings, and we got wheat cloth around, which is a little hard to mow around. But how does that, I mean, what's your take on wheat cloth?
No, I don't use it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we do not use it either, but many of our colleagues do, who have had very good experience with it. Early on, as Stroud was getting involved in these tree plantings, we experienced some problems with that weed cloth actually providing cover for voles. But we've never done a research project on that to really understand how much voles use weed cloth in that way or not. I will say that we see many successful plantings with it. It preserves, it helps conserve soil moisture, it keeps weed growth down. And again, if you're planting into a site that doesn't really have voles, like a more yard environment, I would say there's no downside to weed cloth.
Great, thank you. Or did you have one more comment?
Yeah, I just saw, and I saw one question that's really important, and I wanted to make sure we didn't lose it. And that was, if there are a lot of deer in the area, what about protecting those trees long term? And this is something that we are now really trying to convey to all of our landowner partners, and that is, keep that tree, if you have deer in your area, keep that tree shelter on longer than you think you need to. Once those trees, you're getting tired of looking at all these tree shelters, You feel like they're ugly. It's year 4. The trees are looking so happy. It's like, let's liberate these trees, only to have half of them scraped by a buck that fall. It is devastating to see. It doesn't always kill the tree, but if that buck gets all the way around a tree, it's a goner. So leave that tree shelter on longer than you think. In fact, if it's not causing any molding problems inside from too much moisture, the tree will happily split that shelter open when it's ready. So we just leave them on in deer heavy areas.
Interesting.
Great. I've actually run into a couple of plantings where we had buck scraping on the trees and actually knocking the shelters off. So important to really reinforce those things because it is pretty devastating to see all the work you've done and then just to have it kind of destroyed like that.
I had a wonderfully cathartic moment a few months ago when I was doing some winter shelter maintenance, and a deer just strolled over to me and just hung out with me very boldly. So I just lectured this deer on how they create so many problems for us. I'm sure the deer didn't understand any of it, but I felt so much better.
But maybe he passed it along, you know.
You probably thought, who is that crazy guy in our little woods?
That's great. Yeah, I love the deer. They're beautiful, but maybe not what they do to our trees. Awesome. Well, I guess we will move to, I see, Bruce, you have a hand up if you have a question.
Thanks so much. And thank you all for all this information. It's fascinating. My question is, a number of our plants are coming in as bare root. And so if we pot them to just so we can hold on to them for a little bit longer, what's the best material to put in the pot?
Okay. The nurseries use what they call ProMix, which is a very light, highly permeable soil mix, not unlike what you would buy in the store, like potting mix. Potting mix would probably be just fine. But just one thing to probably more important than that soil medium is what your plan is for watering through the summer months, because once they leaf out and start drinking, if there's not rain for a while, you just have to hit those things with water, man, a lot. So just be ready for that challenge. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Great. So it looks like we actually got a little extension, a few more minutes for questions because there's just so many great ones. So the next one I have for both of you is from Holly. She said that she's noticed the top of the tube sometimes scar the bark. Should the tube be removed at that point?
I would say that if you put the tube in so the flared part is up, then you're going to avoid that problem. The tubes have a flared part, and it's my understanding that the tree, when it grows, flops around in the wind, that's where the rubbing happens. Whereas the down at the bottom, where it's a perfect circle, you can use that to kind of wiggle that into the ground a little and keep those, make it a little more challenging for those voles. Is that right? Monte?
Absolutely right, Greg. And I would, when you all, if you are planting with volunteers, you'll go over, you know, how to plant a tree, all that, which will be different with bare root versus container grown. This point that Greg raises is something that's often overlooked and really important. We go on a lot of sites where those shelters are installed upside down, and it's really, they need to be turned around. That tree flare, that flare at the top, and you'll see it when you get your packet of tree shelters, that always has to be on the top for this very reason, because the other side will scar the tree.
Okay, great. Thanks again for all the great answers, both of you. So I think one more question would probably be good here. So our last one, how is Monte preferring to manage multi-stem and shrubs here?
I'm glad she gave you the tough one.
Yes, and I'm so glad this question came in, whoever you were. I actually had a slide about this, but I'm thinking Don't geek out, Garber. Just go over the basics. Multi-stem shrubs, so important for diversity, so important for pollinators, so important for getting a native understory established at the same time that the trees are getting established. But they present a challenge, right? Because if you have a second way of protecting the shrubs, a different way of protecting the shrubs, say cages, which work very well, but are a hassle.
And time consuming.
What's that?
And time and money consuming.
Yes, time and money consuming.
Yeah.
As soon as you throw in a different style of protection for your shrubs, and they will need protection, you've got twice the complicated maintenance ahead of you. So here's what we are doing, and this is different than 10 years ago. We are putting all of our shrubs, including the multi-stem shrubs, into the same tree shelter, and not the short shrub shelters that you might be getting. And if you're getting shrub shelters with your shipment, that's great. The shrubs will love those short, wide shrub shelters, right? And go ahead, plant them in those, and you don't even need to worry about them in the first year. But as those shrubs are getting above that 2-foot shelter, the deer are going to move in, and those shrubs will never get higher than 2 or 3 feet. And they're not hurting the shrub at all. The shrub is just getting pruned, and it's building root vitality through that process. The problem is, once you get finished with the maintenance part and you want to walk away and go plant another site, those shrubs are going to keep getting hammered. So the cage that you can build with a 4 or 5 foot kind of steel fence or wire fence works great. And that would be a good solution if you've got short shrub shelters, and come to us for suggestions on how to build a cage cost effectively. But if you do have 5-foot shelters and you have deer, a lot of deer in your area, which is most Pennsylvania, put that shrub in that 5-foot shelter. And then once 2 years in, once you see that multi-stem shrub really getting unhappy at being cooped up in that narrow shelter, keep the shelter on, slice it open, keep the stake there, keep the shelter there, slice it open so that shrub can spread out, and yet it's got these nice tall leaders that are now well above deer browse height. That makes sense.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that. Thank you. That's very useful. Yeah.
Great. Thank you both so much for your thorough answers. I think we're wrapping up our Q&A now. So if we didn't get to your question, I saw in the chat, Katie mentioned that we will be following up with more answers. So I'm going to pass it back to Katie to wrap things up.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Greg and Monte. I wasn't kidding when I said we had a full packed program. We're almost at the end of the hour, and I feel like we could keep talking for hours. Trees are also one of my favorite things, and I love to talk about them, so I am always up for a chat about them. What I did want to do is give Greg a moment just to orient. We've had a couple of questions in the chat about this too, but what does the distribution process look like from here? When can people kind of expect that trees will start to be available? What should they look for from you, Greg?
Okay, thank you. We are tagging them right now. We will then start sorting them into 500 planting groups, which is a logistical nightmare. But once we get them into those groups, then we will transport them to the hosts that each of you who ordered through us put on your order form. Go back and check that out. And then when we get them there, that host will call you and say, your trees and plants are here now, your tubes and stakes are here, and then you kind of make a mutually agreeable time to come pick them up. If you're local and you signed up to get them from me, wait for a call or an email from me, because that means we have your stuff packed. However, if you want to join the incredible crew of volunteers and you want to come pick up some trees, let's say that you're in Lancaster and you want to pick up, you're willing to come here, you've got a covered vehicle, so those trees aren't going to be flopping around in the wind. We have people who will be glad to not have to come here and pick them up and may not have the right kind of vehicle. So we're open to more volunteers. And also one other thing I wanted to address, and people were saying, is there any way to get trees this year or into the future? My email, I believe, was in the information at the beginning. I may have some extra trees left after we do all this distribution, and it may well take us 2 to 3 weeks. So be patient if you can. Planting in mid-April is still adequate. You can, the earlier the better, but I usually go till the end of May anyway, if I have to. But if you want to come pick them up, just make sure that I've got them. And I know what I was saying. If you didn't get any this year and you're interested, in a couple 3 weeks after I've kind of spread out that 15,000 trees to those 500 people, at the moment on paper, I have some left over. We'll see if I really have them left over and how many mistakes I made in my distribution, but you can contact me in a couple of weeks and maybe I can help you with some. It's mainly going to be those wetland plants. Not enough people are planting the wetlands, and we keep getting more, we get more and hope that more people will plant them near along streams, but that doesn't always happen. So.
Thank you, Greg. So the short answer is that you can look for follow-up information from us or from Greg in the weeks to come. This is a mammoth operation that mostly happens through volunteers. So we really appreciate your patience as we get all these pieces moving. Greg.
I would just say that, again, doing it this way, you are part of a huge community that is making a ton of difference. Overall, I'd say by the end of this year, we're at the 60 to 70,000 tree level. That's not near enough of that 5 million, but it's a lot. And it's a lot of small plantings, and it's a community of people that, well, the 20 people that I had out here yesterday made new friends yesterday, because we're all of the same mindset, and we love planting trees. We love taking care of the planet. So join our community. The work's a lot more fun in community.
Thank you, Greg. And I'm just going to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about opportunities that are coming up with PA IPL to get involved. Like I mentioned, this program was made possible through our partnership with the Department of Environmental Protection here in Pennsylvania. They've given us a grant to do environmental education, and so our major thanks to them for helping facilitate this program. And allowing, people like me to put all the pieces together. We also have lots of other opportunities coming up. This is part of a series, so we'll meet again the first Friday in May to learn more about environmental education. So you can look for those details in the follow-up email that we will send. There are lots of other ways to get involved with us, and I want to just quickly highlight that one of the big things we do each year, we host our annual bike and hike. So it happens throughout the month of May. We just launched our registration link today, so you can get the first sneak peek at what we're doing. That registration will be open through April if you would like to join us. You ask your friends and family to sponsor you to either ride or hike with us, and then we help organize bike and hike trips throughout the month of May that you can participate in, or you can go at your own pace. It's a great way to get outside, support a good cause, and make new friends and community. We also do have our weekly newsletter that's launching, and we send out regular updates. So if you'd like to get involved with us, the link to sign up to be on our mailing list is also available in the chat. And if you would like to give in support of programs like this and to help continue support this incredible volunteer work that we do, distributing trees in the spring and fall, we invite you to make a contribution. And our big thanks to those who contributed a small donation to help cover the cost of today's program too. And the final thing that I will plug before I end our time together today is just to say that conservation is one part of the work we do here at PA IPL. We also do a lot of work on the advocacy side, which is, it's all interconnected and intertwined. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about or are passionate about, I would invite you to sign up for our advocacy monthly policy and advocacy monthly calls, where we go through all of these things that are happening in Pennsylvania, connect them to what's happening at the national and the global level. And so would really invite you to get plugged in and learn more about how these conservation efforts plug into the greater work that we're trying to do to build a sustainable community for all of us. All right. I don't think I missed anything. Is there anything final that Greg or Monte would like to share with us before we end our time together today?
I would just like to add a huge thank you to Monte and to CBF. Our work would be impossible without them. So they are foundational.
I absolutely agree.
Feeling is so mutual, Greg. I mean, we can do all the research in the world, but if there's no one out there to use it, you know, deaf ears. And
Absolutely.
Katie, thank you for setting up this great program. So happy to be part of it. And if I could leave you all with one last thought, you are one of the few statewide organizations working on climate change. And something that I didn't mention in my talk is that one of the leading problems for Pennsylvania streams is not pollution. I mean, pollution is always there for many streams, but temperature is a huge problem. Our streams are too warm. So when you all are out there planting trees along streams where that is a possibility, you're not only doing all the great carbon work, but you're also helping to keep that stream cooler, which is protecting all the organisms in there. So I'll leave it at that. And thanks again, Katie, for inviting me.
Thank you, Monte. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can look for a follow-up email from us with all of the things that we've shared and more. And please stay connected with us, and happy planting.